In 1892, a desperate father had his 19-year-old daughter dug up from her grave. Her heart was cut out, burned to ash, and fed to her dying brother. All because they believed she was a vampire. I went to her grave to see why they were so afraid. Now, I think I've brought that fear home with me. They say some stories are better left alone. That some graves should never be disturbed. This is definitely one of those stories. But me? I've always been pulled toward the stories that history tries to bury, those moments where folklore gets terrifyingly real. And there's no story more terrifyingly real than Mercy Brown's, who became known as America's most famous vampire. The legend is rooted deep in the soil of rural Rhode Island. It's a 19th century panic where families were literally digging up their dead, convinced a supernatural predator was feeding on the living from beyond the grave. It sounds like something out of a horror movie. But it wasn't. So, I decided to see it for myself. I was going to travel to the exact spot where this all went down, the grave of Mercy Lena Brown. I wanted to stand where they stood, feel what they felt, and maybe, just maybe, see if there was any truth to the legends. But I wasn't just going to visit. I was going to wait until midnight and try to see if the curse they were so afraid of was just a story. Or if it was something I could wake up. It was a really, really bad idea. Section 1. The history of the panic. To get what I did, you have to get what they did first. And you need to know, this wasn't Transylvania. This was Exeter, Rhode Island, in the late 1800s. The monster wasn't some count in a cape, it was a disease they called consumption. Today, we know it as tuberculosis. It was a brutal, slow-moving illness that hollowed people out from the inside. It would creep through a family, making them cough up blood, turn pale, and just wither away. To a community that had no concept of germ theory, it looked like a curse. It looked like something was draining the life right out of them. The Brown family was a tragic case study. First, the mother, Mary, died. Then, the eldest daughter, Mary Olive, followed. When the son, Edwin, got sick, the father, George Brown, started to get desperate. His neighbors had a theory, a dark piece of folklore they brought over from Europe. They believed that sometimes, the first person in a family to die from consumption didn't really rest in peace. They believed that person would become a vampire, staying alive in the grave by magically feeding on the health of their living relatives. In their panic, they talked George into doing the unthinkable, digging up his wife and daughters. On a cold day in March 1892, a group of men went to Chestnut Hill Cemetery and started digging. The first two bodies they exhumed, Mary and Mary Olive, were decomposed, just as you'd expect. But when they opened Mercy Brown's crypt, who had only been dead for 2 months, they found something that terrified them. Her body was almost perfectly preserved. There was even blood in her heart. To them, this was all the proof they needed. Now, we know that because she was kept in an above-ground crypt during a frozen New England winter, her body was basically refrigerated, which slowed down decomposition. But to the terrified farmers of Exeter, it was the undeniable sign of the undead. They performed their ritual right there in the cemetery. They cut out Mercy's heart and liver and burned them on a rock. They took the ashes, mixed them with water to create a tonic, and gave it to her sick brother, Edwin, to drink, a gruesome last-ditch effort to break the so-called curse. It didn't work. Edwin died 2 months later. But the legend of Mercy Brown, the girl whose heart was burned to save her family, was born. And it's a legend that has never really left this place. Section 2, the journey and the grave. Driving into Exeter, Rhode Island, really does feel like you're driving back in time. The roads get narrow, the woods get dense, and the houses get farther and farther apart. It's quiet here. Almost too quiet. You can feel the weight of all that history, that kind of isolation that could make people believe in monsters. I got to Chestnut Hill Cemetery in the middle of the afternoon. In the daylight, it's a peaceful, pretty unassuming place. Old headstones lean on each other, covered in moss. But you know Mercy's grave the second you see it. It's different. There's a thick metal strap holding the headstone to its base. The official reason is to stop it from being stolen. But it's hard not to look at it and wonder if it's meant to keep something in. People still leave things for her, coins, plastic flowers, little vampire toys. It's this strange mix of a historical landmark and a modern shrine. Standing there in the sun, I tried to picture the scene, the desperate father, the scared neighbors, the freezing cold air. It just felt sad. She was just a 19-year-old girl who got sick, and her memory was turned into a monster story all because of fear. I spent about an hour just walking the grounds, letting the atmosphere sink in. The cemetery is small, and it's surrounded by these thick woods. It's easy to imagine how, when the sun goes down, this quiet little place could turn into something else entirely. The story felt real here. And as I looked at her name carved in the stone, I knew I had to come back. I had to know what it felt like when the sun was gone and I was all alone. CTA, as night starts to fall, the whole vibe here is changing. The air is getting colder, and every little sound from the woods feels 10 times louder. We're about to do what we came here for. And if you're hooked on this story, you should probably subscribe, because you're not going to want to miss what happens next. Section 3, the midnight ritual. Going back to a cemetery after midnight is a whole different experience. It stops being a place of rest and starts feeling like a place of waiting. The silence is the first thing that hits you. It's so absolute that your brain starts inventing sounds. Or maybe they're real. A twig snapping in the woods. The wind, which sounds a lot like a whisper when you're listening hard enough. My heart was hammering against my ribs as I got out of the car. All I had was a single candle and some matches. The beam of my flashlight cut a nervous slice through the dark, glinting off the old headstones. Everything looked wrong. Shadows bent into shapes they shouldn't be. The peaceful place I saw just hours ago was gone. This was something else. This was a place of legends. I found my way back to Mercy's grave. In the tight beam of my flashlight, the headstone looked huge, like a monument. The woods behind it were just a solid wall of black. I felt completely, totally exposed. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely light the candle. The first match went out. The second one sputtered, but the tiny flame finally caught, throwing a weak, dancing circle of light around the grave. I wasn't about to do some complex, occult ritual. That just felt wrong. Disrespectful. So instead, I just knelt down in front of her grave. And I talked to her. "Mercy," I said. My voice sounded so small in the huge silence. "My name is, your name. I'm here because I want to understand your story. They were afraid of you. They called you a monster." I stopped, just listening to the woods. "Nothing. If there's a curse," I went on, "if any part of this legend is real, show me. I'm here. I'm listening." Saying those words out loud felt like I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. It was a direct invitation. And right then, the air got heavy. The temperature seemed to drop. And that's when I heard it. A loud snap from the woods, right behind the grave. This wasn't a little twig falling. It was sharp. And it was close. I froze, whipping my flashlight into the darkness, but there was nothing there. Just trees. My breath caught in my throat. "It's an animal," I told myself. "It has to be an animal." But then came this feeling. This powerful, overwhelming feeling of being watched. And not by an animal. This felt intelligent. And it felt hostile. Every single instinct in my body was screaming at me to get up and run. I stayed there for another minute, just frozen, listening. The woods were dead silent again. Too silent. And then the candle flame, which had been flickering wildly, just went out. Like someone had snuffed it between their fingers. That's when I ran. Section 4, the curse at home. Driving away from that cemetery, my adrenaline was so high I could barely think. I kept checking my rearview mirror, honestly half expecting to see someone standing in the road. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I was spooked. It was a dark cemetery and a ghost story. By the time I got home, hundreds of miles away, I had almost convinced myself of that. Almost. The first night home, it started. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a scratching sound. And it sounded like it was coming from inside my bedroom wall. I live in a modern apartment building. There aren't any mice or pests. I flipped on the light, and the sound stopped. The second I turned it off, it started again. Just a slow, steady scrape, scrape, scrape. A few days later, things started moving. I came home from work and a book I'd been reading was on the floor, open to a random page. I know I left it on the table. The next day, a picture frame on my shelf was facing the wall. They were all small things. The kinds of things you could easily dismiss if you really wanted to. But it was the pattern of it all. And the feeling that came with it. The worst part is the cold. There's one corner in my living room that is always cold. I can have the heat on full blast, and when you walk into that corner, the temperature just plummets. It feels like stepping into a walk-in freezer. I bought a thermometer to check it, and it's consistently 10 to 15 degrees colder than the rest of the apartment. But the nights are what's really getting to me. I've started having the same nightmare, over and over. I'm in a dark, tight space, like an old crypt. I can't move. I can hear the sound of shovels hitting frozen dirt somewhere above me. And I can feel myself getting weaker, this slow, cold drain, like something is feeding on me from far away. I wake up feeling exhausted and looking paler than I did the day before. Just like they said about the victims of consumption. Conclusion: back in 1892, a group of people were so terrified that they dug up a 19-year-old girl, cut out her heart, and burned it. Their fear came from a disease they couldn't understand and a superstition they couldn't escape. I went to Mercy Brown's grave to try and understand that fear, to get close to a dark piece of history. I told myself it was just a story. That tuberculosis was the real killer, and the vampire was just something they made up to cope. I still believe that's the historical truth. But history and truth are two different things when you're alone in the dark. I stood at her grave and I invited whatever might be lingering there to follow me. And now, my nights are filled with sounds I can't explain, my apartment has a cold spot that won't go away, and my dreams don't feel like my own anymore. So, was it all in my head? Am I just freaking myself out? Or did I actually bring something back with me from that cemetery? What do you guys think? Let me know down in the comments. As the days passed, I tried to brush it off, chalking it up to a vivid imagination fueled by folklore. But every time I turned off the lights, I could feel that same oppressive weight in the air. Shadows stretched across my room, flickering at the corners of my vision, making me jump. My friends noticed the change in me too. I was quieter, more withdrawn. The topics I used to enjoy felt too light when compared to the darkness creeping into my life. I found myself staring blankly at my walls, dread clawing at my insides, as though I were being drawn into a shadowy abyss that whispered the name Mercy. I was haunted, not just by legends of a dead girl, but by the very real impact of what I'd invited into my life. Despite my efforts to dismiss the strangeness as mere coincidence, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Each night, I would lie awake, listening to the low hum of the silence, now punctuated by that persistent scratching. It grew louder, more insistent, as if whatever was beneath the surface of my existence was trying to claw its way back into the light. I tried to lean into my rational side, calling on logic and reason to untangle the knots in my stomach, yet the feeling of being observed only intensified. And as the moon cycle waxed and waned, my dreams morphed into vivid, haunting memories of standing in that graveyard, shivering under the weight of unseen eyes, faces twisted with grief and fear. Each morning I awoke feeling heavier, like a thick fog clung to my bones, suffocating me until I almost forgot what it felt like to feel free. Time slipped through my fingers, and the boundaries of sleep and wakefulness blurred, leaving me wondering if maybe, just maybe, I had teased something darker into this world. I was no longer just a visitor to that cemetery, I was a part of this story now, entwined with the echoes of the past that refused to let go. As I continued to spiral, I turned to research. I spent hours online, diving into folklore, talking to historians, and even seeking out paranormal experts. Each new telling of Mercy's tale only added layers to the one I'd uncovered. The more I learned, the more the lines between reality and myth blurred, making me question everything. Were there voices in the woods? Did shadows truly have a life of their own? It was as if the legend had latched onto me, feeding on my fear and curiosity, pulling me further into its chilling embrace. Friends began to express their concerns as I spiraled deeper into this obsession, but I couldn't stop. I needed answers, the kind only Mercy could provide. As the days turned into weeks, I decided to visit Chestnut Hill Cemetery once again, compelled by an unshakable urge. This time, I was armed with a notebook, ready to capture what eerie sensations I might experience or any signs that could explain the phenomenon around me. The memories of that initial midnight visit haunted my thoughts, twisting them into a tangled knot of anticipation and dread. I arrived just before dusk, the sky painted in hues of orange and purple, casting long shadows that danced like specters among the trees. Everything felt heavier, charged with a kind of energy that set my heart racing as I stepped onto the familiar path. As I approached Mercy's grave, my pulse quickened, every step filled with the weight of expectation. My flashlight flickered slightly, an unwelcome reminder of the fragility of light in this vast darkness. I found myself glancing over my shoulder frequently, convinced that the shadows were moving, watching me. When I reached her headstone, something unexpected happened. A soft gust of wind swept across the cemetery, stirring the leaves and sending a chill down my spine. I felt a presence. Something was different this time, as if the air itself had become charged with the remnants of past fears. Kneeling beside the grave, I opened my notebook, determined to document everything. But as I wrote, the air thickened with an almost palpable tension, and I couldn't help but wonder, was I provoking something I didn't fully understand? Sudden whispers danced around the edges of my hearing, just beyond comprehension, blending with the rustle of the trees. Was this the echo of Mercy's sorrow, or something darker, lurking within the shadows? As I continued to write, a sudden crack echoed from deep within the woods, causing my heart to skip a beat. My pen froze mid-sentence, and I squinted into the darkening tree line, trying to penetrate the inky blackness that seemed to swallow any light. The noise resembled footsteps, heavy and deliberate, yet I was utterly alone. With each passing second, I felt the atmosphere grow even more oppressive, pressing against my chest until it was hard to breathe. I wanted to flee, to return to the safety of my car, but a strange magnetism kept me rooted to the spot. Perhaps it was the allure of unveiling Mercy's story or the desperate need for answers that pushed me deeper into the encroaching night. Then, another sound, a low, mournful wail, as if the very earth below me sighed with regret and longing. It sent chills coursing through me, rekindling every fear I had battled since I first stepped into this haunted legacy. As the shadows danced menacingly around me, I mustered the courage to call out, "Mercy, if you're here, let me know." Each word felt insubstantial against the chilling breeze, and I held my breath, waiting for a response. The forest seemed to grow eerily quiet, my question hanging in the air like an unfinished thought. With every ounce of will, I stood, wrestling between the push to connect and the instinct to escape. Just as I turned to leave, a frigid gust knocked my notebook from my grasp, pages scattering like leaves caught in a storm. Panic surged through me. It was as if she was trying to communicate, to lead me back into her haunting tale or to warn me that something was about to unfold. I scrambled to gather the loose pages, but my fingers trembled uncontrollably, threading through them as whispers filled my ears once more, melding with the rustling leaves. Would I dare to listen? As I stood there, breathless and trembling, I couldn't shake the idea that the whispers felt almost familiar, as if they were beckoning me to uncover hidden truths. Each breeze carried a fragment of an unspoken story. The shadows pressed in, crowding me with the weight of countless secrets. I fumbled with the scattered pages, trying to piece together my frantic notes, even as my instinct screamed at me to leave. The sensation of being watched intensified, and with it came a creeping dread that I was no longer just an observer. Suddenly, a chilling voice echoed in my mind, a whisper that felt both foreign and achingly close. "Come, find me." It wasn't merely a command, it was an invitation, laced with an urgency that compelled me to stay, to dive deeper into the mysteries surrounding Mercy Brown. Panic rose in my chest as I searched for the source of that voice. "Who's there?" I called into the darkness, the tremor in my voice betraying my fear. There was no answer, just the relentless rustle of leaves and the echo of my heartbeat. My instinct screamed at me to flee, yet the pull of the unknown latched onto my mind. I took a shaky breath and stepped back toward Mercy's gravestone. "Show me," I urged, my voice barely above a whisper. For a brief moment, the wind died down, and silence enveloped me, thick and eerie. It felt like the very world held its breath, waiting, as if the cemetery itself was poised on the edge of revelation. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the trees again, but this time it was followed by a soft laugh, melodic, yet laced with an unmistakable chill. My skin prickled as I turned to face the source, but the shadows only deepened around me. There, in the fading light, I glimpsed a figure darting behind a tree, fleeting like a wispy memory, and I could have sworn it looked just like her. With my heart racing, I clutched my scattered notes tightly, torn between my desire to understand and the urgent need to escape. Something was waiting, something tied to Mercy's tale, and I knew then that I had stumbled into the heart of a story darker than I could have ever imagined. It didn't feel like fear anymore, it felt like curiosity intertwined with dread, the two emotions feeding off each other as I realized I had crossed a threshold. The whispers grew louder, intertwining with the wind, sounding like a gala of lost souls conversing in tones just shy of comprehension. My heart raced as I stared into the encroaching darkness, every instinct telling me to run, yet a strange urge pushed me forward, to explore the relationship between Mercy and the shadows around me. I clutched my scattered notes, shaking but determined to discover what lay hidden, not just in the graveyard, but within myself as well. My thoughts were now a turbulent sea of visions, the haunting wails of the past, the cold grip of her story, and the unyielding bond between life and death. Would I be able to unravel this thread, or had I already become ensnared in Mercy Brown's legend? As I whispered her name into the night, I felt as though the graveyard responded, its silence almost reverberating with ancient secrets, daring me to delve deeper, to confront whatever lingered in the shadows. As I stood there, heart pounding and breath coming in shaky gasps, I knew I could no longer ignore the urgency pulling me closer to this spectral connection. My fingers tightened on the notebook, pages crinkling under my grip, echoing the inner turmoil coursing through me. The chilling laughter faded, but its residue lingered, swirling around me like a mist, intertwining with the very air I breathed. Driven by an instinct far more primal than fear, I murmured, "What do you want?" The woods remained silent for what felt like an eternity, and I shivered, feeling as though the world had gone quiet to hear my question. Then, a gust swept through the trees, rustling the leaves, carrying with it a faint but unmistakable scent of decay. It was both repugnant and intoxicating, seducing me to draw closer. "Please, show me your truth," I urged, the vulnerability in my voice betraying the strength of my resolve. In that moment, the shadows shifted, flickering just at the edge of my light, and I could almost make out shapes, forms that moved like echoes of the past playing out before me. With renewed composure, I stepped forward, feeling the cool earth beneath my feet. The rhythmic pulsation of my heartbeat synchronized with the whispers surrounding me. Something stirred within the very fabric of this haunting space, pulling me into its depths. I glanced back toward the path where I had entered, momentarily torn between the comfort of retreat and the unquenchable thirst for knowledge urging me onward. The call of Mercy's story reverberated in my mind, weaving together threads of tragedy and unresolved longing that resonated within my own spirit. "Mercy," I breathed, allowing her name to linger in the air. Suddenly, as though she were responding, the temperature plunged further, each breath turning to mist before me, forming ephemeral shapes suspended in the atmosphere. It was time to confront the truth, time to embrace whatever connection bound me to this forgotten legend. I would not turn back, I would defy the darkness eager to claim my soul. As I drew closer to the heart of the graveyard, surrounded by the restless spirits of history, I felt a sense of purpose ignite within me, a prelude to the unraveling I feared yet yearned for. I stepped deeper into the cemetery, feeling not only the weight of the darkness pressing against me, but a shiver of anticipation. The trees loomed taller, their branches like crooked fingers reaching out as if trying to guard some ancient secret. It was then that I caught sight of a silvery glimmer weaving through the underbrush, an old locket, lying partially buried in the earth. The soft moonlight bounced off its surface, beckoning me closer. With trembling hands, I brushed away the dirt, revealing a delicate engraving, a silhouette that resembled Mercy's headstone. I felt a strange pull, as though this forgotten piece of jewelry had forgotten its purpose in the graveyard and was now waiting to be reunited with the story it once belonged to. A sense of urgency raced through my veins as I held the locket, its coldness burning against my palm. It whispered promises of hidden truths, waiting to unravel the threads of time. Despite the gnawing fear that something might be watching, I opened the locket. Inside was a faded photograph, a young girl with bright eyes and a bittersweet smile, unmistakably resembling the portrait of Mercy I had seen in old records. I froze. Was this a part of her life that had been overlooked, a glimpse into a soul cut tragically short? With the locket cradled in my hands, the whispers around me grew louder, rising into a chorus of urgency, intertwining with the rustling leaves. Each murmured syllable felt like an echo from the past, years of mourning, regret, and an unfinished story yearning for resolution. I realized that Mercy was not alone. Her spirit lingered among these headstones, bound by an unfulfilled longing for her voice to be heard. My heart raced, igniting a flicker of hope amidst the shadows. Perhaps I could reconnect the past with the present, giving life to the tales that had remained silent for far too long. As the shadows swayed restlessly, I knew I had to uncover the truth hidden within the whispered legends, to breathe life into Mercy Brown's story and, in doing so, maybe reclaim a piece of the haunted memories embedded in this haunted place. As I stood there holding the locket, the night hushed around me, the air thick with anticipation and unease. The whispers intensified, swirling like a storm, compelling me to listen closely. What secrets lay buried beneath the weight of time? What truths could the fragments of Mercy's life reveal about her tragic fate and the legends woven into this land? I took a deep breath, steadying my racing heart, ready to delve into the mystery. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the cool night air wrap around me, and whispered, "If you're here, Mercy, speak to me." The shadows seemed to pulse in response, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of connection, a peering glance into the void that sought to tell its tale. Back in that graveyard, surrounded by the history and heartache of a life extinguished too soon, I felt Mercy's presence seep into my bones. The locket was no longer just a relic, it was a key, a conduit through which I could hear her voice. Shivers of realization coursed through me as I finally understood that this wasn't simply about uncovering a dark past, it was about acknowledging the pain of a young woman unjustly labeled a monster. The urge to connect, to salvage her legacy, gripped my heart. I vowed to not just be an observer of her story but a voice to carry it forward. This chapter of fear and sorrow would not fade into oblivion. It was time for the world to hear Mercy Brown's truth, a lingering tale of innocence stolen by superstition and dread. As I stood there, the night carrying a heavy silence, I felt a resolve settle deep within me. I clutched the locket tighter, like a lifeline drawn from the depths of tragedy. If I could give voice to Mercy's story, perhaps I could finally lay to rest the fear that had seeped into my life. I envisioned the anguish of a young girl condemned, forever trapped between worlds, her story crying out for liberation. It was time for healing, for both her restless spirit and the remnants of my own turmoil. I could not unravel the past without facing its truths, and I was ready to become the bridge between shadows and light. A gentle breeze swirled around me, carrying with it a sense of reassurance, and I knew this was not just a farewell, it was an awakening. Mercy Brown's legend would no longer live in fear, but in the collective understanding of her struggle. I opened my eyes, filled with a newfound determination as I turned away from the grave, ready to step into a world molded by understanding rather than fear. Mercy's story would reverberate through time, a reminder that even the darkest tales deserve to be heard and honored. The shadows that once lurked in my mind seemed to dissipate, replaced by a sense of peace, as I began my journey to share her truth with the world.